Hey, thanks for joining me. I had a reader who watched one of my videos about the Mora companion leave me a comment about how I really needed to look at the Hultafors and Bahco knives. That he was just a real fan of those and felt like, you know, they were every bit what a Mora is. And so I started looking into it. The first thing I did is just simply go on Amazon and find a few models and look at some reviews. And I have to say, I did not buy a Bahco knife. The reviews were pretty bad, a lot of them. And so I just did not find myself compelled to buy one for those reasons. The reviews on the Hultafors, though, various models were pretty good. They weren't expensive, and so I bought probably their least expensive. This is the Craftsman knife, model HVK, and so we're going to put it on the workbench here and take a look at it. It's a good utility knife. There's some things that I like about it. There's some things that really wasn't too impressed with, and then we'll maybe compare it with a Mora and kind of talk about how one compares to the other, and you know, if I were to make a choice based on that knowledge, what would I buy? So anyway, put this on the workbench. We'll take a look. If you would, please click on the like and subscribe buttons, and let's take a look at this thing. Okay, this is the Hultafors Craftsman knife. There you go. You can see from the sticker, which is still in the sheath, this is the model HVK. This was the least expensive of the Hultafors knives on Amazon. It was $11 and change. That's roughly $12 for this knife. And, you know, it's for the money, it's not a bad knife. I'll certainly give it that. But there's some things I do want to talk about. Now, let's talk about some of the good before we get to the bad. I really like the grip on this. The grip is a little longer than you typically see on a Mora. If it has the pommel here and the finger guard, it's just a little wider. Now, I don't have really big hands, but from some of the other reviews, I saw people that have really big hands kind of like the slightly longer length of that. So it's got a nice texture to it. You can't really see it too much in the camera, but it is a nice texture. It's very you know, easy to hold, comfortable to hold in just about any gripping position. It seems to be good. Now, I have to say, when I got this knife, it wasn't very sharp. If you see if I can show this, I have sharpened it because, well, you can't really test a knife if it's dull. But you can see, if I can get the camera light just right, you can see the machine marks. I've got some pictures. I'll insert a picture here that shows it. But there's machine marks along the edge of this blade where it was pretty roughly ground, and consequently the edge that it had was a bit rough. Since then, so what I did is I have a Washita stone that I really love. I've talked about it on a past video, but it's one that was my grandfather's and does just an amazing job. And I didn't cut this far enough to get rid of all the machine marks, partly because I kind of wanted you to be able to see them, but partly because that's just wasting a lot more material. And I consider knife steel to be a resource, and when you grind it away unnecessarily, then it's just losing that resource. So, I mean, theoretically on a knife, there's only so many times you get to sharpen it before, you know, you've gone too far. So anyway, I used that Washita stone on it, then I used a black Arkansas stone, and now it is shaving sharp. I mean, this knife will get really, really sharp, but I have to say, from the factory, it was not very sharp. Anyway, but it cuts really well now. I was just doing a video about some camera stuff, so I have this film box laying here, but it cuts just beautifully. You know, I can't complain at all about how well it cuts. You know, so For those of you who didn't know, I have a photography channel too, hence the film box. Anyway, the knife, the steel is not really polished. You can see the grind marks on it. It's not unattractive. It's kind of a satin finish, but it's not what you'd call polished, if that matters to you. It doesn't really matter to me. I'm happy with that kind of a grained satin finish. Now, this is not ground to work a fire steel. This blade is fine blanked, which means it's stamped. There's a there's a die that's got a hole in it, the shape of the blade. That's the female die, and then a punch, which is the male die, which is also shaped like the blade. And when this is the flat sheet of metal this blade is punched out of that sheet, it rolls one side kind of around the edge of the blade, and it leaves a burr on the other side. Now the burr is when they finish the blade, the burr is kind of gone, but would probably work a fire steel going this direction. So if you had a fire steel, like let's say my finger was a fire steel, you could go this way and you could make sparks. But if you were left-handed and tried to do this, not happening. This is too rounded. So, and that's not an uncommon thing. I think I talked about that on another knife that I reviewed. Those knives that are stamped out, if the edge of the blade is just left in the as stamped condition, that's going to be the result of that. Anyway, not a big deal. If you wanted to use it with a fire steel, I'd just take a file to it and draw file the back of the blade here so that you could have a good sharp edge going both directions. Anyway, this is SK5 steel, and SK5 steel it's a decent knife steel. Doesn't have quite as high a carbon content as, say, 1095 or one of those kind of steels. Like Mora uses a 1% carbon steel. But SK5 is known for toughness. It's definitely a good knife steel. Cold Steel uses it on some of their knives. This knife is made in Taiwan. So I'm glad if it was made in the Republic of China, Communist Republic of China or whatever, I probably would have hesitated to buy it. It's not that I don't buy anything made in China, and I recognize that we live in a world where things made in China are just very commonplace. We all just kind of, I don't think anyone can say they don't have anything in their home made in China, not made in China. But I tend, especially when it comes to knives and tools, I tend to try to buy U.S. made first, and then maybe some of the other countries that are, I guess, a bit more friendly to the U.S. Anyway, that's another discussion for another day. If we look at this is a Mora 510. It's one of my favorite knives. If you look at the finish on the Mora, you'll see that there's a lot of polish on the blade. It really is nicer finished. The edge was polished when I got it. The sides are well polished. Again, a fine blanked blade that is not, the spine has not been worked. But the Mora is a 1% carbon steel, so it's something akin to 1095 steel. You can see these are both very similar in size. And they're comparable in price. They're both in that $11, $12 range on Amazon. So, they're kind of competitors to each other. Personally, I like the handle shape on this a little bit better. I don't like a big finger guard because sometimes I want to get up close or do a pinch grip on the blade or something, and this kind of gets in the way. But that's just a personal preference. But if you're going to spend the same amount of money, the Mora is made in Sweden, a little bit better steel, a little bit nicer finish on the blade. Unless you have some compelling reason to want to buy the Hultafors, personally, I probably would just go with the Mora. Still, the Hultafors in its own right it's a decent knife. For the price, absolutely, you really can't complain about anything regarding it. It's well made. It's good materials. The sheath if I have to give it a plus over the Mora, I have to say the sheath. The Mora sheath is on the 510. I know some of the Moras have better sheaths. This is a little cheesy. you know, I probably would be happier with a knife if I made like a leather sheath for it. But I mean, it stays in, but it's not real snug. And putting this on a belt, well, I don't know. I guess you could. And it's supposed to do the whole buttonhole thing, which I guess is popular in Sweden. This sheath also has the buttonhole thing. It has a, this is kind of interesting. I've never seen a sheath quite like this, but you can pop open this and then put this like through the, you know, under the belt or through the belt on your pants, fold it over and snap it onto itself. So you could put this on your belt without having to, you know, pull your belt off. This little piece that sticks up here, I think, is made to lock the, if you put this over one of the buttons in your clothing, this is supposed to help lock it down so it doesn't come off. And the only negative thing I would say about this is I've never seen a hinge, a plastic hinge that didn't eventually break. So that may be a weak point in time. Still, it's kind of an innovative sheath. It holds the knife well. It's got a good thumb piece here to help you pop the knife out. Though the knife is not super tight, it stays in. But you know, one of the problems I had with one knife, and I really like this knife from Cold Steel, but you can hardly get the dadgum thing out. It's really hard to get out of the sheath, which means if this is on your belt, then it won't fall out, but you may have a hard time getting it out. So there's that. It's a decent sheath. I can't really complain about it. I think it's well thought out. You know, for $12 plus shipping and the governor's share, it's a decent tool. Now, Hultafors is a company that's been around a long time. I think if you are into Swedish tools, you've probably seen their name for some time. Many people will be familiar. This is a Hults Bruk axe, HB, made in Sweden. You can kind of barely see that still here. I found this at a thrift store, actually, which was for like $7 or $8, which is a real find. But it's been a fantastic hatchet. It's got a fairly long handle. I just can't complain about it at all. It doesn't have the fancy shape like, you know, like a Gransford Brooks or even some of the other Hults Bruk axes have. This is more of an American pattern rather than a European pattern, but still it works. Fantastic hatchet. So, you know, I'm familiar with the Hults Bruk or the Hultafors, that company, and they're known for quality products. And so I think, you know, this knife is for the money, for what you pay. It's definitely worth the money. So there's that. That's the Hultafors Craftsman knife. They do have some other models. There's an outdoors knife. I think there's 2 or 3 versions of an outdoor knife, and they seem to have good reviews and are well thought of. So I guess in looking at this, if you like the design, you like the price, and you want to get a Hultafors knife, I don't think you'll be disappointed. Be prepared to sharpen it, maybe. Anyway, that's the Craftsman knife from Hultafors. Oh, there you go. That's the Hultafors Craftsman knife. It's good utility knife. You know, good materials. It's definitely worth the money. You know, if I were to compare it to a Mora, frankly, I'd probably just buy the Mora. But that's me. You know, if you have some reason you like the Hultafors knives, you know, they'll serve you well, I'm sure, and they seem decently made, and they're certainly inexpensive. Anyway, well, if you have any thoughts or questions, please don't hesitate to leave me a comment. And as always, I appreciate you watching.